just a couple minutes. Thank you, everyone who's joined us. We're just going to give 1 or 2 more minutes for folks to find their Zoom link and join us, and then we'll be getting started. So thanks for joining us. This is the Kingston Forward DGEIS scoping session. And so we'll be getting started here just a couple of minutes past 6. Thanks for joining us. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. I think we'll go ahead and get started with just a few quick reminders before we start the meeting. So again, this is the Kingston Forward Draft Generic Environmental Impact Statement Scoping Session meeting. We are just getting started, and want to give a reminder that this meeting is being recorded, and you can find it tomorrow at engagekingston.com. So if you know anyone who wasn't able to join us live tonight, but they're interested and would want to see the meeting, you can let them know that the recording will be posted there after tonight. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Bartek to give a short welcome.
Yeah, hi everyone. I am the Director of Housing for the City of Kingston, and also the project manager for the Kingston Forward project on the city side. On behalf of the City of Kingston and also the Kingston Common Council, I do want to welcome you to this scoping meeting. The purpose of tonight is not to review the draft of the zoning code itself, but to focus on the environmental review and specifically the scoping aspect of that. So we'll go into what that means a little bit later tonight. We're going to start by just giving a brief overview of what's happened so far with the zoning code and the rewrite, and that'll take about 5 minutes. Then we'll explain a little bit about the scoping process and next steps from there. And then we'll go into public comment. And if you haven't registered, you'll be able to let me know that you'd like to comment by either raising your hand or by using the chat function. And we'll repeat that once we get to that point. So with that, Amy, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you. So my name is Amy Groves. I'm with Dover Colin Partners. We're the project lead, and we're leading the form-based code writing and engagement on this process. But we have a much larger team of consultants that we're working with. With us here tonight, we have David Gilmore and expect Nicole Allen to be joining us from LaBerge Group. So they are leading up the environmental review process for our team. And then we also have team members not with us tonight, but you likely met them on other Kingston Forward meetings from the Land Use Law Center, Hall Planning and Engineering, Transportation Consultant, and Gridix, who are going to be leading up an online code platform that we can use to test and review the code. So a little bit of background of how we got to where we are tonight. So we started last fall. We had an initial site visit, an online survey, really doing an analysis and visioning process to learn about what's important to people in the city of Kingston and what should be included with the zoning rewrite. So we had a charrette in early November, which was a series of meetings and workshops. And there's a summary of all of that input and process so far up on the Engage Kingston website. Since that time, we've been working to create a first draft of the code. And so we had some meetings in February as we had some questions that we wanted to work through on some key areas of the city to get clear on the vision to include in the code. And we expect to have a first draft ready by next month, within a few weeks. So with that, we're kicking off the scoping session for the environmental impact statement. So the idea is that we're identifying what the significant issues are that need to be included within the scoping. So that way, when we have a first draft of the code, we'll be able to get into that analysis work right away and work up the two simultaneously, so that as we are reviewing and refining the code, we'll also be doing that analysis work and moving forward towards next fall, having both of those being completed. So again, just a quick review of what we've been doing so far. That charrette that I mentioned in early November, this was a series of workshops. We had online Zoom meetings like this one, as well as in-person meetings where we were gathering input, doing some brainstorming around tables. Also had different stakeholder groups that we came in to meet with us. We did a series of walking tours. And while we were gathering all this feedback, we had our team there drawing and testing ideas. So an iterative process where we could get in input and draw ideas and then review those drawings with community members and asking, is this what you meant? And so all of that is, we have a charrette summary report that is on the Engage Kingston site that you can look through and get up to date on what we've been hearing so far. Here's a summary of kind of the big ideas that came from that process. So things like having small incremental development being easy and encouraged to infill within the city, concentrating on building to street relationships. So how future buildings should relate to the street and the context of buildings around them, that they fit within the context of the various city neighborhoods. Housing was a big topic of conversation, wanting to produce more housing, a variety of different housing types, including accessory dwelling units to help with affordability in the city. Wanting to move towards a green, resilient future, so having standards that support that. Also standards that support walkability and bikeability with street design, getting the parking right size. So there's not too much, not too little, but the right amount that can support economic development while also not taking away from walkability and bikeability. And then finally, just fixing some of the trouble spots that were identified in the ordinance. So things like non-conforming lot sizes or some standards that need a bit more clarity so that everyone understands what the rules are and they're clear and easy to follow. So I mentioned in February, we had a couple of meetings focused on the Roundout waterfront, as well as Albany Avenue and Hurley Avenue. And in these areas, we had some questions about what the community vision is for the urban form and the mix of uses in the area. So we did some test drawings and gathered some feedback. And again, we have a brief summary report now up on the website. So if you missed any of those meetings, you can get up to speed on the drawings that we showed and the input we received from those meetings. And so we're taking all of this feedback and looking at the zoning, and our charge is to create what's called a form-based code. So a form-based code is a type of development code that focuses on the built environment and physical form rather than building uses as the main organizing principle for the code. So it's just a way of thinking about the built environment and then writing all the rules so that future development is contextual and fits in well with the surroundings. And so you can see there's a tool called the transect that is used where we can actually clarify the different areas, everything from we call T5, the urban center. So these would be areas like Broadway or in the center of Rondout. T4 is are the urban neighborhoods. T3 is where the neighborhoods start to see a little bit more spacing between buildings, and buildings are set back a little bit more from the street, all the way down to T1, which is natural areas. So by classifying the built environment, then we can write all the rules for future development to fit these standards. So that's just a little preview of where we're headed. But again, the focus for tonight is on the environmental analysis and specifically the scoping for what should be included with that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Gilmore.
Thank you, Amy. My name is David Gilmore. I'm an environmental planner with LaBerge Group. We're a planning firm based in Albany, New York, and will be assisting Dover Cole and the rest of the team within the city with development of environmental review for the proposed adoption of the form-based code, which Amy just overviewed. Tonight, I'll just take a minute leading into the scoping session to try to set the stage for explaining why we're doing Environmental Quality Review Act processing steps at this stage, and to try to describe to you the approach that we're using. Essentially, scoping, I think of it as forming a cookbook. It's the process to develop written documentation, really the scope, and we've provided to you the interested public a draft scope. And that scope, it outlines the topics and analysis of the potential environmental impacts that the adoption of the form-based code could potentially introduce. The scoping document is used in the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act to essentially guide or serve as the cookbook for forming an environmental impact statement, whereby we evaluate the potential for environmental impacts due to the adoption of the form-based code. An environmental impact statement, again, objectively analyzes the potential for impacts. The purpose of the scoping session tonight is to really receive public comment on the process that we propose to use and the types of information and types of impacts that we propose to analyze. In accordance with this project, we're trying to do initiate SEQR as early as possible according to the New York State framework. So just briefly, I'll give some more overview, but tonight we're asking you to sign in. The scoping session is being used to obtain public comments on the essentially the outline of analysis that we want to provide in relation to the form-based code when it is released. We won't provide responses on the spot, but we'll be generating your input and comments on the draft scoping document. We're asking that each person be prepared to speak for 3 minutes. You can submit written comments as well to the city, as I'll come to explain, and we'll try to identify the next speaker as well as the speaker that will follow. So just in terms of purpose, again, the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, known as SEQR, provides that all actions in let's say the public realm, the governmental realm, need to be assessed for their potential of creating an environmental impact. So the Common Council, as the lead agency under SEQR, has chosen to generate a generic environmental impact statement. And the GEIS is a tool to evaluate the whole sort of set of possible actions and or sub-actions and effects that could occur with the adoption of a new zoning law. So we're assessing the future land use consequences of the form-based code, and that is what the action is, the proposed adoption of a form-based code. And again, the code hasn't been released yet, but what we are doing is we're setting the framework, identifying the topics and the data that we'll assemble and the types of analyses that we'll provide to evaluate how the code could create effects in the community, and to analyze whether there's a way that we can temper and mitigate those potential environmental impacts. Next slide, please. So The form-based rezoning has its own website within the Engage Kingston public-facing website of the city of Kingston. If you go to the Engage Kingston website, you can find the Kingston Forward form-based code project, what I call folio. And if you scroll down on the right, you'll see tonight's scoping session, and we'll give you a picture of that in a minute, and you can find the draft scoping document, and that's also available directly on the city's website. As has been identified, the form-based code is scheduled for release in mid-May, and there'll be public meetings that are structured around discussing the code. Really what we're doing right now is the SEQR process as soon as possible within this whole process to identify what are the topics and possible effects that we want to analyze. So this slide just shows the Kingston Forward website, and within it, you can see, if you scroll down on the right, you'll see the scoping document. That's the red rectangle on the bottom right of your screen. So we have had the benefit of procedural steps up to this point to identify what are the possible types of goals of the project, as well as what are the possible types of categories of impact and particular potential effects that we might analyze. The consulting team performed site visits and stakeholder interviews in September of 2022. We actively participated in the community, multi-day, multi-stakeholder, ongoing community-based design charrette in November. There was information gathered in online survey in October and November. There were additional public outreach meetings regarding additional places within the community in terms of Albany and Hurley Avenue corridors, the Rondout waterfront, plus an additional survey. So now we're at the point of, after the Common Council's positive declaration declaring that they wanted to have a environmental impact statement prepared, and the Common Council released this draft scope for public consideration. Now we're at the point of this scoping session where we're receiving comments on that draft scope, and we would make adjustments based on the comments received and present that scope for consideration and adoption by the Common Council. And then that becomes the tool with which we produce the generic environmental impact statement, that programmatic assessment of how the zoning could affect factors like land use in the community. And the Common Council will actually, in a sense, measure or evaluate the degree that we have satisfied everything that we said we were going to do within that scope of work and analysis when the form-based code comes out. So the scoping session that we're holding tonight on the 21st, just be aware that there is an opportunity to submit public comments until essentially the close of business on May 2nd.
David, I just want to stop you before you proceed. Amy, if you could go back to the last slide quickly. There is a typo on here, so just in case there's any confusion, the first 3 events did happen in 2021 and are not scheduled for this year.
Oh, I put 2022. Getting ahead of myself. Sorry about that. Thank you, Bartek. So I think I'm done with key dates.
That hasn't updated now. Thank you for that part.
My bad. I actually remember now that I hit going back and changing that. What was I thinking? Next slide, please. So anyways, we're analyzing, this form-based code is citywide. And so we're analyzing essentially the potential for environmental impacts or effects across the whole city, since this is a citywide rezoning when that code is released. Next slide, please. And so I hope I've given you a sense of what is scoping. It's the process to establish the written outline for a draft generic environmental impact statement. It's identifying topics to address in the DGEIS, and even we're endeavoring to identify the data that we'll use within collect and use within our analysis. It focuses in on the potentially significant adverse impacts with an objective, in a sense, how the SEQR law is written to try to find ways to minimize those potential effects. And we're ensuring public participation, that there's an opportunity for the interested community to comment on what we see as potential categories of analysis that will perform against this code when it's released. And the process for scoping is set out in the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act regulations, which specifically scoping is within 6 NYCRR 617. It's 617.8. And just so this scoping session is the meeting that we're using to get the public input so that we can develop, going from sort of this proposed or draft scoping outline to the final scoping outline for our DGEIS, or our draft generic environmental impact statement. That draft DGEIS will be put out to the community, and there'll be likewise another opportunity to review the analyses within that DGEIS and comment it on it by the public. And then that will go back to the Common Council. We've publicized this scoping document release and the opportunity for public comments. We're not intending to answer questions on the spot. I think I answered that before, but really gather your interests and input on the scope, and all of the germane commentary and questions received on the DGEIS will be, on the draft scope will be considered by the Common Council as they adjust and develop a final scope of for SEQR, and adopt that so that we have a roadmap for DGEIS preparation. So, and again, I hope I've given you an idea of what is a generic environmental impact statement. It's a type of environmental analysis that's used to consider broad-based actions rather than being more specific, like an EIS, an environmental impact statement. Say for a particular property, we're doing a citywide analysis, so we're doing an almost programmatic or general review of the possible conceptual and other potential impacts of this action, which is approval of the form-based code. And this broader focus within the GEIS provides for conceptual analysis, evaluating the synergistic or cumulative impacts of the action, and we can assess and compare different options and contemplate potential impacts, such as according to different land use scenarios. Next slide, please. And so within the draft generic environmental impact statement scoping document that we've put out for public consideration, I just wanted to identify the sort of categories which we're organizing this document under. On the right is the table of contents, but there's essentially 12 categories, and it's things like consistency of the adoption of the form-based code with community plans, socioeconomics, like possible effects of the zoning on the housing environment, historic resource analysis or contemplation of how the use affects open space and recreation, and of course, land use and zoning, but also things like the water resource environment and the plant and animal resources of the natural resource environment of the community. And so for each of those sort of categories, and you've got your whole scope, draft scope laid out for consideration, but essentially we're looking at what is the existing condition, what are the potential impacts, and we're identifying potential mitigation measures. We're not at this point within the draft scoping document analyzing the form-based code. It hasn't been released yet. We're just setting out the framework for how we're going to analyze the form-based code. So the scope describes information that will be assembled and used to analyze potential impacts, and we'll use those sort of dimensions of existing condition, potential impacts, and identified mitigation measures. We'll analyze those. And as I mentioned, we've provided for a lot of input gathering to understand what are the subjects and possible issues of concern to the community so that we can group and categorize those and assemble those possible concerns within the draft scoping document. So you can submit your comments to Mr. Starajaj at City Hall, and the mailing address is there and on the Engage Kingston and the city website. You can submit comments by email to Mr. Starajaj, and if you're going to submit comments, do them by the close of business on May 2nd, or at least get them postmarked by that point, please. So that's what I have, and I turn it back over to Amy.
Yeah, so at this point, I'll just step in. If you would like to speak, I'd ask that you raise your hand, or you can also chat the panelists, and I will unmute you in order. I'm going to turn it over to our registered speaker, which is Eileen Katasky. And so Eileen, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you. I'm Eileen Katasky. My husband and I are residents and property owners in Ward 2. I will begin with some obvious questions. How would the proposed form-based code be regulated and administered, and by whom? And what department will have oversight, and to what extent? Are there consequences to noncompliance? How will adherence to the affordable housing component and the developer incentives be monitored, and by whom? Will the changes be a benefit to residents and property owners as well as landlords and developers? And should the property change hands, how would the rules apply to the new owners? Will a licensed architect or professional engineer be required to ensure adherence to the new code as well as the New York State Building Code? And what roles will planning and zoning boards, the Building and Safety Department, and our public officials have in oversight responsibilities? They currently provide guidance early in a proposal process, which can be helpful to the applicant, whether it's residential or commercial. Regarding the question of eliminating the requirement for off-street parking, please consider that additional on-street parking would only add to the current problems of streets now cluttered with vehicles of all sizes and description. These vehicles impede the work of our Department of Public Works, especially during the winter months. And I'd like to reference now specifically our aging infrastructure and environmental concerns. In keeping with our green initiatives, I must question how added structures, roofs, and other non-permeable surfaces will be an enhancement. How will aging stormwater collection systems handle this additional runoff? The street flooding during recent storm events should be a warning. Has any consideration been given to permeable driveways and parking lots for newly constructed projects? Our potable water supply must be considered. Usage will no doubt increase, further straining that precious resource. How is this addressed? And with increased development, our wastewater collection and treatment system will face even greater demands. Have these issues been considered? Increasing density through the establishment of new apartments, duplex, and other multiple dwelling units to every neighborhood will impact our open space, clean air, natural ecosystems, and wildlife. These are assets we must certainly protect, along with renewed dedication to historic preservation. Growth without appropriate oversight will no doubt change the character of this historic city. Regulation need not be onerous. Modifications to our code may certainly be needed, but a deliberate abandonment of many regulations may be an overreach. And we are stewards of this land, thereby given great responsibility. Our decision to change our existing approach to development will have far-reaching impact going forward. If I could just say that I would like to add a comment regarding the outreach and publicity of this project thus far. COVID-19 was not helpful for the rollout of this consequential change to our zoning. And therefore, it should be front and center on our city website, and folks should not need to hunt various websites for information. I can see how discouraging it might be trying to navigate to other unknown websites for information. And I strongly suggest that a direct mailing should be made to residents and property owners so they may be better informed of these proposed changes to further encourage a wider participation. We look forward to reviewing the completed draft of the proposed form-based code, and I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Eileen. Next, Victoria.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, hi, good evening. My name is Victoria Polidoro. I'm a partner at Rodenhouse & Shaw Polidoro, here on behalf of William Gottlieb Management Company. My client is a large landowner in Uptown Kingston that seeks to work collaboratively with the city in this rezoning process. We have participated in the walking tour for Uptown Kingston and been following presentations by Dover Cole, and we do look forward to seeing the first draft. However, I must request that the city adjourn this hearing on the scoping document until the city releases the draft zoning. It is impossible to make educated comments on the adequacy of the scoping document until we understand the breadth of the zoning changes. As just one example, how can we evaluate and comment on potential alternatives to the proposed changes without understanding the proposed changes themselves? In its rush to complete the zoning, the city is prematurely starting the SEQR process. SEQR evaluates proposed actions, and here the proposed action has not yet been disclosed. The city must extend the public comment period on the scoping document to at least 2 weeks after the draft zoning amendments have been released to allow all interested persons the opportunity to review and formulate comments. In the absence of such an extension, this required public comment period on the scoping document is legally defective. Thank you for your consideration, and we look forward to providing substantive comments at a future date.
Thank you, Victoria. So at this time, I have no further public speakers. If you would like to speak, you can raise your hand, or you can also use the chat function, and I will provide another minute or so for anyone interested to do so. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds. Again, if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand, or you can also use the chat function. Okay. Stefan, you are next.
Do you hear me?
Yes, you can hear. We can hear you.
All right.
You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
I'm not a specialist. I'm not an urban planner. I'm Stefan Saffer, an artist who runs, together with Laurie DiChiara, Artport Kingston down at the waterfront, the gallery. And we are interested how the aspect of cultural development is reflected in the zoning. But also, I couldn't find out, and I emailed up front to find out whether the zoning or the new planned zoning would overrule existing zoning, or is the existing zoning staying and it's just for the future a new zoning and a new philosophy? I find the process quite interesting, but I agree with the speaker before me that it would be great to know what are the changes and debate that in maybe a pragmatic way. Yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say. I mean, it's exciting, but it's also very, very theoretic at the moment in my eyes. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. All right, if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand and I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, Kevin.
Okay, I unmuted. Okay, sorry. Yeah, my only comment at this time would be on the involved and interested agencies. I think it should be split into which ones are involved agencies in terms of permitting and which ones are interested agencies. And I also noticed that there's a couple of boards that I serve on that are not listed as interested agencies. So we'll probably address that during the written comment period. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And I'll give it another few seconds. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. I'm going to give it one final opportunity. Okay, Amy, I think we can move on.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out tonight and who did take the time to give some comments tonight, and remind everyone you can continue to give feedback on the website. The website's here, the engagekingston.com/KingstonForward. So please continue to do that, and we'll be taking in and considering all this comments and feedback and getting back some answers to some of the questions. I think a lot of the questions, once we do have a draft code, that will be some of the questions tonight will be answered with that, as far as the administrative processes and how exactly that works. So we'll have a draft, again, I mentioned in May, so very soon, and we'll be scheduling review meetings to review those provisions. So those announcements will also be coming out on the website, as well as a variety of ways. So we'll be getting word out very shortly about those. So again, thank you to everyone who came out tonight. Bartek or Nicole, if you have any other last words or thank yous for tonight.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for attending. The date of the release is scheduled to be around mid-May. So if you aren't registered on engagekingston.com on the Kingston Forward project, you can be notified. You can be the first to know when the draft is released if you'd like to register. And again, the public comment period for the scoping is open until May 2nd. Nicole, is there something you want to say?
No, just want to say thank you as well. And there'll be lots of opportunity for additional discussions in the future too.
Okay, thank you, everyone.